What's your biggest freak up that you were never caught for? Was a key holder for a Christmas peak retail job, and I somehow left the place unlocked at the end of the night. I was first to arrive in the morning, tried the door, and it just opened. In fact, I was working for 10 minutes before I registered what had happened and that I hadn't needed to unlock the door. Nothing was missing that we ever noticed, but I was severely shaken. Ended up volunteering for terrible shifts which the owner thought was due to get up and go attitude, but it was mostly because I felt like crap for very nearly ruining a little family store's business. Yup, I did the same. My shop was in Oxford Street in London. The door just swung open as I pushed it. My heart nearly stopped. My parents went out of town in high school, so about 10 of my friends and I skipped class and took our boat out on a lake for the day. We had forgot to put the drain plug in and only realized it once the rear of the boat was completely submerged. Miraculously, we got it back to the boat ramp just as the engine choked off. Burned the clutch of my 84 Volvo wagon getting the boat out of the water, but we got it out, drained it, put the plug back in, and went back out on the lake. It had started right back up. 2 weeks late, the clutch completely went out on the car and the motor of the boat burned out a week later after that. My parents helped me pay for a new clutch, and the only thing I heard about the boat was the mechanic had commented on how clean the engine was. I'm sure the mechanic knew exactly what had happened, but thought it was my dad who had sunk the boat. My father remained clueless until I fessed up 20 years later, and even then he didn't believe the story. Now, all you have to do is drive the boat fast enough to get it up on a plane, and the water will get sucked right out. Replace plug. Boat on. About 2 years ago, on my way home from the shop, someone asked me for directions to a street. I had only lived in the town a few months at that point, and didn't ever go out, so I didn't really know my way around, but was too socially inept to tell them that. I also hadn't really been listening but didn't want to ask them to repeat themselves. So I just pointed in a random direction, then said go that way, take a left at the end of the road. About 30 minutes later they showed up at my door. I saw it was them and assumed they had come to insult me or something for giving them bad directions, but realized this couldn't be true since they didn't know where I live. When my dad answers the door, I go hide in the hallway listening to their conversation. The first thing he says is, "Sorry we're so late. Some W gave us crap directions." I just hide in my room for the following 4 hours hoping they didn't come in. It's holy crap. Just say you don't know. It's perfectly unawkward way of dealing with that and won't mess up someone's day. Not sure about biggest, but a few days ago, while pulling on an extension cord under the couch trying to reach the phone charger that was plugged into the end of it, I accidentally pulled the Christmas tree over onto my grandmother and uncle. One of the legs that holds the tree up broke and everyone just assumed the tree was too heavy on that side. Haha, whoops. Haha, I love the image of this tree falling on your unsuspecting grandmother, unless she was hurt, in which case, I'm not laughing at all. When I was around 12, my mum bought these 2 round glass side tables, with one metal leg in the middle holding up the glass. The first one was smashed into 1,000 pieces when I fell from a handstand and my legs went straight through the table. Afterwards I was told off more times than there were shards of glass. So imagine my horror when I inadvertently break the second a week later. Luckily for me this break was a little less obvious, as when I knocked over the table the glass did not break but just broke off the metal leg. I therefore carefully balanced the glass on the leg and various other objects at equal lengths to maintain balance. When my mum went home and picked up the table to move it to her chair, she only picked up the glass. To this day she still believes that glass snapped off, and when she went out to buy the same tables again, she would advise our whole family to pick them up from the leg only. Worked at Wendy's and mistook a $20 for a $50. Gave the customer $30 over in change. They didn't say anything and took off. The thing is, we were extremely busy that day. Electricity was out all over town and people were waiting in line 45 minutes to get their food. Our restaurant was running on generators. The managers were simply too busy to count the registers correctly at the end of our shifts. They just shoved the money into the safe. $30 doesn't seem like much, but anything over $1 short was a write-up. Pretty sure $30 would have gotten me fired. That was a dong move by the other person. If someone gives you extra change, you give it back to them. You would not want the cashier to keep some of your change. Worked at a grocery store. Knocked over 2 tall pallets of Pepsi and Mountain Dew. Threw some of it into the trash compactor to hide some of it, which exploded more soda everywhere. Gave up trying to clean it up quickly. Clocked out and left before anyone saw me. Haha, I can totally imagine your face trying to clean up the damage by throwing it in the compactor in the moment of utter panic when crap starts to spray everywhere and then just giving up. I poured 200 milliliters of liquid nitrogen down the lab drain instead of letting it evaporate. I directly realized I fricked up when it made an awful clicking sound while running down the drain. I don't know if the guys at the lab had any problem because of that, but if they did, sorry. Similarity story. I work at Taco Bell and on my second day they had me crying nachos. I learned the hard way if the nacho basket is wet, big metal basket, and you put it in the boiling grease, it will 100% make a ton of noise and scare you sober. Frying nachos, not crying, but crying nachos sounds funny, so I'm leaving it. I used to work at a bank and I misplaced $15,000 cash. My co-workers stayed an hour late tearing apart the place and going over my transaction logs to figure out where it went. It was under my keyboard. The next day we pretended it never happened. When I was a kid I drew some cartoons that were totally not appropriate for a kid to be drawing. Fearing that my parents would find them, I decided to flush them down the toilet. A4 paper doesn't flush too good, so my parents found all of these filthy cartoons half flushed and blocking the toilet from draining. When questioned by them I was so embarrassed that I managed to pin the blame on my friend from across the street. A couple of months ago I had a job in a restaurant as a chef. I didn't have any previous experience as a chef, nor the education for it, but some of my friends also worked there, so they got me employed there. Anyways, in the kitchen we had deep fryers. Every time we locked up for the night we could of course turn them off, except that one time when I didn't turn them off. Coming back next morning the place was incredibly hot and it smelled like burned crap. The staff that were there at the time could never figure out who left them on. I of course said I had no idea too, seeing how I almost caused an oil fire. I got away with it and never mentioned it to anyone. TLDR almost managed to cause an oil fire in a restaurant I worked in. Not me, but a friend burned down a paint factory. The factory was next to a train line, so all trains had to be stopped. This was all while on his break time at school. He was never caught, delayed hundreds of people and caused thousands in damage. He still has the newspaper article about it. He said it was an accident, but he'd burnt down other building in the past, so I'm pretty sure it wasn't. A friend. When I was in 4th grade, I along with some other boys in my grade started hammering at the thin bathroom drywall with anything we could sneak into the bathroom. The outside was supervised and we had entire class bathroom breaks. Eventually, it got to the point where there was a 2-3 inch hole in the wall. The teachers got wind of this through maintenance and started sending us into the bathroom one at a time. I went into the bathroom, inspected the hole a little bit, and bumped it a little too hard, causing a section of the wall to fall off and effectively quadrupling the size of the hole. A bunch of kids ended up getting punished for it and their parents got small fines, but I was never caught. I still feel a bit guilty about it today. Fricked up my exam. Broke into the teacher's office with a friend and took it with me. The teacher thought he lost it and I was able to retake it. Never got caught. When I was in high school I started up my own little internet business and never paid taxes on the income I made, which well exceeded what was taxable. As a teenager no one teaches you about taxes and it isn't exactly something that is top of mind. Long story short, flooded a bank by over tightening a mains water valve upstairs. Valve bursts. Water causes thousands in damage as it cascades down through the roof. The bank is shut for weeks and the vault floor had begun to sag from the weight of the saturated floors. They investigated the cause. I kept my mouth shut and they concluded the valve was faulty. That's one way to rob a bank, if all the breakers trip because of the flood. I let the class hamster die over Thanksgiving break. It was 4th grade and I'd volunteered weeks before to take it home over the break to feed it. Being, 10 years old, I was highly disorganized and didn't think to mention it to my parents or anybody after that. Oddly, nobody mentioned it to me before we left for break either. Grown up me knows that the teacher must have been at least partly at fault. Kid me knew beyond a doubt that I'd doomed that critter to a slow, painful, lonely death by starvation. The day after the break we returned and found him dead, which the shrieking prompted literally the first time I'd thought of the poor thing since volunteering. I caught the teacher's eye and she caught mine, and looked away. A less adult person might have denounced me in front of the class, but as it was nobody ever said anything to me about it. I don't think I ever even told my parents about it. Yeah, that's the teacher's fault. This my oldest brother's story. When he was in high school, he was a bit of a hotshot, super popular, a bit off and but, played on varsity, all that jazz. Well, there was this mansion being built by the golf course a neighborhood over, and when I say mansion, I mean mansion. This thing was going to be huge. It would make the surrounding 3-story 6-bedroom homes look like it's pool houses or slave quarters. Well, my brother and his too cool for school posse decided to throw a raver inside, still under construction, and a long drive off the road. It was easy to remain undetected, but one thing led to another, and the house caught fire. The kids scattered. The whole thing burned to the ground. I didn't know 50 teenagers were capable of such a secret, but they never got caught. I used to get detention all the time in junior high school. I got it so much that I joined the chess club so that I had a reason to stay after school for an hour a couple days a week. I then just forged my mom's name on the detention slip and served my detention. Mom had no idea it ever happened. On the off times that I didn't have detention, I just played chess. Well, there always was a pretty big overlap between the problem children and the chess club. When I was in Iraq back in 2008, I was given this little gator, like a 4x4 vehicle, to wander around and do my business with. Well, one day I'm aimlessly driving this thing around. As I'm pulling up to our housing units, we call them chews, not paying any attention to where I'm driving, I end up slamming the corner of this gator into an air conditioning unit on one of my friend's chews, and effectively rip the AC unit out of the wall. I hear him scream and naturally, knowing I'll get in some serious trouble for the damage, I take off back to my office. About an hour later, in comes my friend ready to wage war on some Iraqi idiot who just smashed his AC off his home while he was in the middle of pleasuring himself. I mean, this guy apparently was butt naked playing Mr. Handy with himself. It took everything in me to hear the story out and not tell him I was the one who did it. Our command had to hire a contractor to repair the housing unit and I let it slide all year that an Iraqi smashed that thing. TLDR. My whack job ruined a whack job. Best TLDR ever. I was doing an internship at one of the biggest media firms in the country as a video technician. I did it on a voluntary basis because I had days left between my studies, and it would look darn diddly good on my CV. My main responsibility was loading captured video into the system and prepping it for editing. Most of what came in was recorded on tapes. Digital cameras weren't all the way there yet, so when loading video into the system, the entire length of the tape had to be run. You can see why they could use an intern for this. Most of the material I had to load was for late evening news or shows that were only coming on days later, so there never was too much pressure or stress involved. But every once in a while material came in that had to be loaded right that instant. For example, for the news 20 minutes later. I had been doing it for some time, and was given the trust of also doing the more time sensitive pieces, so every video that came in went by me. Upon entering my editing cell at some point there was a videotape running that wasn't mine, and my tape had been taken out, so I stopped it, took it out, and just restarted my tape that had been stopped. As it turns out, this was footage meant for the headline of that evening's news, which went on 10 minutes after I stopped the loading of the video. When they came looking for the images and told me what it was, I told them the tape had run its length, and they assumed that the guy who started loading it made a mistake, as he was known for doing when he was under stress. So the evening news never got the footage for its headline that evening, and they blamed the other guy. Sorry, Martin. This happened when I was 14, and I still can't believe I got away with it. I was on the school coach on the way to school when it started snowing. The roads became clogged with traffic and slowed to a crawl. Almost immediately, I noticed a cramping pain in my stomach. I tried to ignore it. The pain built to a crescendo, to the point where I couldn't even enjoy the Simpsons episode I had downloaded on my first gen iPod Touch. Eventually we neared the school, and I thought I was going to make it. However, the coach missed the usual turn, adding an extra, incalculably painful, 5 minutes to the journey. It was at this point I made my fatal error, and decided to release a little fart to try to relieve the pressure. Horrible. Molten poo shot from my anus and bubbled its way along my thighs and down my trousers. More and more gushed out, like a tidal wave of acidity. The smell was horrendous. It burned the nostrils. Someone laughed. EWW. Did you crap yourself or something? How I laughed along with them, while my dark grey school trousers hid my shame. The second we got off the coach, I waddled to the nearest toilets, binned my trousers, and changed into my gym kit. We had a little shop on campus, so I was able to buy some more trousers. I stank of poo all day, and 10 years later no one realized I shat myself on school property. In secondary school I always quite enjoyed drama class, except for the fact we had a few complete degenerate kids who always did their best to ruin it. One class we were in the main hall and the stage had these detachable wooden steps leading up to it from the floor. A couple of these degenerate kids were running up and down these steps and hiding behind the stage curtains, and the teacher was telling them to stop or else she'd go get the head principal for the rest of you. They ignored her, and so she went marching out of the hall to get some help. So I decided, with the urging of my friends, to get these kids good. While the teacher was gone and the degenerates were still hiding, I undid the clasps that held the wooden stage steps in place in anticipation of the hilarity that would ensure when one of these kids would come flying down them. Instead, the teacher came back into the room alone, and finding that they were still on the stage, decided to march up the steps after them. As soon as her foot touched down on the first step, the whole thing collapsed beneath her with a sickening snap coming from her leg. She was crutches for almost a year after that. No one in that class of 30 odd kids ever grasped me up, even though they all knew I did it. High school, New Year's Eve. Before we left for a party, a couple friends and I decided it would be fine to smoke a quick bowl before we leave my house. We did it in my brother's room in the basement and blew the smoke out the window well. Then we left for the party. While at the party, my brother called me freaking out, saying the house reeks of pot. My parents would be getting home soon and I was basically screwed. Then my brother had this genius idea: I'm gonna burn a bag of popcorn. Well, it worked. Too well. He burned the popcorn so bad that we had to get a new microwave. In my parents' eyes, this was third kitchen appliance we had to replace because of him. But really, he was covering my butt. Best brother ever. I promised him I would come clean when I graduated high school, but I chickened out because I was on bad terms with my mom at that time. Then I promised I would tell them when I graduated college. Chickened out again. Now I'm just going with, I'll tell them when I have a pot smoking teenager. My brother is the coolest guy ever. One time I was working at a gas station and slept in, ended up coming in like 2 hours late to open by myself. I'd had a hard time sleeping the night before because some crap had gone down with my roommate. Long story short, he tried to beat the crap out of me with an acoustic guitar. My boss, having realized I was late, went and opened for me and was waiting there when I got in. I saw him and just started crying because I was pretty positive he was gonna fire my butt for being so late. When he saw me crying, he said, "Don't worry about it. Take the rest of the day off. Whatever it was, you must have had a good reason." After that I worked my butt off even harder at that job. I felt so bad that I had slept in and he had just let me off the hook like that. I think he thought something was really wrong by the way I was crying, but I was just really freaking scared that I was losing my job. He tried to beat the crap out of me with an acoustic guitar. He thought something was really wrong. I'd bloody agree with him there. Caused all the horses to get loose at this ranch I was working at. I had accidentally left the gate open. Took the wranglers most of the day to get them back. About 10 years ago, I slept with my boss's son at work, after hours, on my boss's desk, on the waiting room couch, and on the conference table. The following morning, a conference was called between office staff. There was dried stuff on the table. Lol. Anyway, Someone yelled out, "Somebody has been eating cookies and milk in here again," and spilled the freaking milk. Again, I couldn't keep a straight face. Had to excuse myself outside for a cigarette so I could laugh my butt off. Oh wow, that was a dark time in my life and a mistake. But at the time I thought it was a good idea. I'm hiring. I work at a supermarket and was stacking shelves at the time. This particular day I was restocking the eggs. Picked up a big bus box full of them. The bottom of the box gave way and I was left frantically trying to clear up around 30 boxes of broken eggs. I put them all on the waste table and walked away. I worked at a golf course when I was younger on the driving range. We had this big cage quad bike that we used to use with an attachment to pick up the balls. Anyway, one day, I'm driving and it's running low on petrol, so I ask if I can fill it up. Boss said yeah, no worries, and left me to it. As a sheltered 14-year-old, I didn't know much, so I filled up the petrol tank with oil, like liters of oil, took it back out and was all good. Next day, went into work and got told the range bike is busted, so I'm just cleaning carts today. I worked out later what I'd done when I overheard the bosses talking and saying they had to drain the fuel tank and clean out the pipes. They thought it was one of the other staff who worked the morning before I came in, but no one got trouble for, so it was smooth sailing for young me. I studied engines after that so I didn't destroy my first car. I told you, we don't know who did it. It wasn't us. Go on, NSA. I accidentally went on a date with a 14-year-old when I was 20. I found out her age 4 years after the date. Nothing happened besides making out, so I dodged a bullet there, and she didn't look 14 at all and was pretty smart and witty. I check IDs now. I was working overtime in a shopping and receiving warehouse for a large pharmaceutical company. Put a bunch of packaging labels on products to be shipped to an area that was recently hit by a tsunami. However, I wasn't paying attention, and instead of sending them to that area I got my orders mixed up. I was new to the job and young and stupid. Clocked out of overtime and went home when I put them on the truck. Week later there is heck being raised because $4 million worth of product got shipped to California instead of that tsunami zone. They never figured out who did it because they have terrible process tracking. To all the people who needed medicine from that tsunami, I apologize. I was arrested at 21 for possession of marijuana and narcotics on federal land. I had about 2 ounces of weed and 1/4 lb of mushrooms. Sure, I was arrested, but I managed to get out of jail after 10 hours, paid my fees of $3,200, clocked into work on time that day. My friend picked up my car, no impound. Family never found out, and I was deferred from judgment. That could have seriously fricked up my life, but once I walked out GF the courtroom it was over. I consider myself getting away with it. How the frick did you get away with that? Also, you know what's up. Shrooms and weed are the best mix. Not me, but a friend got a girl pregnant when we were 15, and his girlfriend ended up having miscarriage, so nobody knew except them and me. I only knew because he told me. I accidentally set fire to a supermarket. Me and a few friends were like 12 and had just discovered fire, so we bought boxes of matches and were just doing tricks with it. If you can believe that. One of them is putting the match top down on the side of the box. Hold it down with your left hand and with the right hand flick it away while igniting it. Great fun. Until one day one of those matches fell in a big container parked behind the supermarket. This was at the loading dock with a big sliding hatch into the building. We thought nothing of it and went to get some candy. When we returned we saw smoke coming out of the container. We panicked and threw open the container. This allowed for air to get to the flames and now the fire started to roar pretty good. We tried to extinguish it with big plastic crates that also stood behind the store, but they too started burning and melting, and finally the sliding hatch started to catch on fire as well. Scared out of our minds we realized we couldn't contain this fire and ran like heck. I lived 10 minutes away and watched the smoke from my bedroom window and heard the sirens of the fire trucks. No one got hurt, but they had to rebuild a section of the building. They expanded at the same time, so I like to think I just sped up a decision that was already made. I didn't play with fire anymore after that. Not a huge frick up, but about 3 years ago I completely ran through one of those tollway lowering gates. I was accustomed to the tolls that just had you stroll through at a lower speed with no gate, ran right through it and snapped that crap in half. At the time I was pretty flustered and just decided to keep on driving. And I figured they would just send me a bill ticket in the mail since there's no doubt a camera would have caught me. Nope. Waited for the ticket for months and nothing ever came. I was in high school and tired of exams. I find out that I somehow missed one of the big physics assignments during the year, and it is crucially important for my final grade if I happen to draw a question about it at the exam. Being 17 and stupid, I decide to bluff my way through and arrive at the exam knowing that drawing the wrong question would result in a failing grade. I am also underprepared for most other questions, but I would at least pass. Somehow I draw my best topic and proceeds to ace the exam, impressing my teacher to a point where he laments me not picking physics for my final year. A+, or the Danish equivalent. 13 for you. I used to ride my scooter to school, and one day I ended up having a half day, i.e. I got to go home by noon. So I took my scooter out and ended up meeting one of my friends from another class near the bike lot. So this guy wanted to have a spin in my scooter, and so I'll let him. He goes around the block and comes back to me. He gets off, and I like a dumbass held the right handle, aka the accelerator. My scooter zooms off into a line of bikes, and the shelf falling on shelf chain thing happens, but with a crap ton of bikes. I did a quick nod to my friend implying we weren't here, and we both made a run for it. The next couple of days in school were tense and I was hoping nobody came looking for me, but the topic never even came up in class, so I guess not many knew about it. It's unlikely the bikes would break, they would just have to be set up standing again. So I was a scientifically inclined high school student and I wanted to drink. I scoffed at getting a fake, or buying second hand because I knew that I could make booze at home. Between the bread machine and pantry I had yeast, sugar, and juice. What else does an inquisitive teenager need to make some sweet booze? While everyone was away I launched my plot. I filled water bottles from the recycling bin with grape juice, brown sugar, bread machine yeast and stowed them in my desk. Some time later, a week, I go back to my bottles. To my disgust, the drawer that I hid them in is filled with gross. Half of my bottles have literally exploded. The corners of the drawer is pregnant with a spongy dank mass. All is not lost however, it seems like 2 of my bottles merely distended past all recognition. They were shaped like footballs and quivered slightly at my touch. I knew then that I had to taste the contents of one of the still intact plastic bottles before they too broke. I thought I was ready to open the first intact one in the sink, but I was wrong. I grab the neck of the beast with one hand, the other I place carefully over the cap. I start to rotate the cap when bam, the contents explode in my face. The angle of the sink meant that the concoction drenched my person, the counters to my sides, the floor behind me, and the window blinds in front of me. The other bottle I opened much more carefully, letting pressure off just a little bit at a time. I am really glad that there wasn't that much liquid for me to drink though. I ended up choking down the semi-solid mass that the yeast had become, which was a huge mistake. My butthole thoroughly regretted the explosive results that followed. I cleaned up the mess I had made in the sink, the floor, and the countertops, but totally forgot about the window blinds. When she asked I just told my momo that was a Coke that I shouldn't have tried to open. TLDR. Teenage me tried to make booze at home and might or might not have fermented anything other than a mess in the window. A scientifically inclined student would do enough research to realize you need an airlock. In high school chemistry we were doing some experiment where you get solution from a giant glass vat, must have been 80 liters at least, put some reagent into it, and watch the clear liquid turn blue. Somehow when I was cleaning up I got reagent into the giant vat. Immediately the blueness began to spread. I internally freaked out, then looked around and realized no one had noticed. I casually walked away. Not 30 seconds later the teacher screamed oh no and ran to the vat. She was intensely staring, trying to figure out how to stop the reaction, but with an inevitable tempo it slowly spread and turned the entire vat blue. She turned, glared at us like a wounded animal, screamed the whole day is ruined, and stormed out of the room. No one ever figured out it was me. That is an excellent example of a chemical reaction though. I'd consider the day saved. I used to work as a valet driver. I was working a restaurant one night on a busy divided highway, and basically we had to drive a customer's car up to the next red light, then make a U-turn so we could drive back down and park in the lot on the other side of the street. A guy pulled up with a new Ford F-250, 25,000 miles. I got in and drove up to the light where I would need to make the U-turn. Because I didn't get there before the light turned red, I didn't get the green arrow that allows me to turn left before the oncoming traffic gets to go. Live in America. Instead I got a green light, and not wanting to let the line of traffic go by before I could make my turn, I decided to go for it. I didn't quite take into account how wide a turn radius a Ford F-250 has, and I nicked the sidewalk with the front right tire. When I parked it and got out, there was an obvious scratch and dent in the rim where I had hit the curb. Basically, telling would have meant that I got fired, and not telling would have meant that get fired only if they found out. I chose not to tell, and the guy didn't notice when he got back out. I don't know if this would be the biggest, but it sure is up there. When I was 16 or 17, I was walking down the street late at night with two of my friends. One of us had acquired a handful of M80s, illegal in the state we were in. We began lighting them and throwing them in the street. Anybody who has ever been near one while it explodes knows they sound like a cannon. After a couple of explosions, a spotlight hits us and a man yells, "Freeze." We broke fast toward a dirt road that led up a mountain. The spotlight was gaining on us fast, much faster than we could run. The whole time this man was ordering us to stop, and it was at the point of near exhaustion that the light suddenly went out and the yelling turned to silence. At this point I believe we were speed walking in the pitch black while trying to catch our breath. We cut off the road and walked through the woods, home. One of my friends that was with me that night was a camp counselor. The first day of camp, the children were to receive a lecture from a police officer on bicycle safety. He said the officer showed up in all of his cycling gear and stressed that the most important part of bicycle safety is always wearing your helmet. He then took his helmet off, revealing a giant incision with several stitches. "I want to show you what can happen when you don't wear a helmet," he said. Not too long ago some kids were lighting off firecrackers at the end of my lawn. I didn't have time to put on my helmet and I chased after them on this bike. They ran up a very sandy road and I lost control of my bike in the dark. I hit a very soft area of sand and was thrown over my handlebars, headfirst into a giant rock. My friend said he froze up as the cop explained how he had to find his way back to his house, bleeding profusely in the dark. We never got caught, but we were so thankful he sustained his injuries and everything turned out okay. 20 years later and we still get a good laugh out of it whenever the three of us get together. When I was 15, before I had a driver's license, I would wait for my dad to go to work at 5 AM and then take my mom's car out for a joyride on back roads. She was a bus driver, so she had the summer off and would sleep in. One day I lost control of the car and drove off the road and missed a tree by a matter of inches while almost flipping the car. I immediately drove back home in a full-on panic attack and never took the car out again. Looking back, I don't know what the frick I was thinking. I'm 33 now and I've still never told them what I did. I'm sure I will one day, but I'm really fortunate nothing bad came out of it. I was a security guard for 6 months or so, and one day a guy asked for a spare key for his locker because he forgot his. I signed out the key and gave him one, only to realize that I had given him the last key on the hook, which turned out to be a master key for all the lockers. I figured he would unlock his stuff and bring the key back to me, but he never came back and just started his 12-hour shift. So I had to go track him down and get it back, which I did. Me and my buddy ran a theft ring out of the electronics section of the big box store we worked at. Over the course of 2 years we probably moved about $45,000 of iPods, gaming gear, games, CDs, speakers, you name it. One day we slipped up and almost got caught, and they had us on watch because they noticed how much stuff had been disappearing. Then some dongweed that fondled our sleeping friend at a party once got wind of it. He worked in receiving and decided he wanted some of the action. The idiots wiped an entire shipment of 10 PS3s and 2 TVs in one shift and went down for the whole thing. My buddy got promoted to customer service and I became the garden center supervisor. 2009 was hilarious. It's not something I would advise doing, nor would I do it again. I really didn't care though, and honestly still don't. The other guy didn't get in trouble for what we did because they didn't quite know the extent of what was going on. We weren't the only ones. The front end was going bonkers. He just took all the suspicion off us. He also didn't get arrested or anything. I guess they couldn't prove anything, so they found another reason to fire the guy, which he already had coming. So I didn't feel all that bad for him. It's a huge international retailer and no one was really the wiser. I view it as essentially victimless. I would never do it to anything like a mom and pop shop or an owner franchise chain or whatever, or even a specialty place like a Best Buy. It was more of a stick in the butt of the corporation. It wasn't even for a gain. Well over 75% the time we weren't selling anything, we were just giving it away. I got my friend's mom a new cell phone when she couldn't afford one. I once saw a kid drop an old butt iPod and break it and just gave him the one I was using because I knew I could get a new one. I own nothing of what we took and neither does my buddy. I think I made about $150 and got like an ounce of pot over the 2 years. It's not something I'm gonna tell my kids about, but it was fun to play Robin Hood. No one got hurt in any way, and I can't change a thing about it. I've never felt any sort of regret for it, and at this point I doubt I ever will. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video.